Okay, so if you're with me still and you're not too confused by this whole idea of signal flow and buses, we're good to go. If you are confused, just go back and check out those videos again. Experiment a little bit with yourself. It's important to understand signal flow because you can do so much with it. If you are good to go on that, we're going to start talking about sends right now. So sends are super cool. Send, the word send in this case is short for auxiliary send. Auxiliary just means additional. Not the primary thing, but additional. And send means basically an output. So an auxiliary send is an additional output. We have the main output for our track, right? The sound comes in, it goes through all the inserts and blah, 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 and then it gets output somewhere else. That's the primary or main output for that channel. It goes somewhere. But we also have these sends, and these sends are like additional outputs that you can use to send the audio signal somewhere else. What's cool about them is that it makes a copy of the signal. So you still have the original signal goes through and it gets sent to its normal output, wherever that happens to be. But you also get a branching one that comes off and goes somewhere else. So this is the original one. And then as it's coming down, it hits the send, and the send shoots a branch off to another place. So now you have two copies of the same sound, of the same signal, going to different places or different buses or whatever for any one reason, and there's a number of reasons why you would want to use this. So all I'm trying to say here is that auxiliary means additional and send basically means output. So these are additional outputs so that you can make copies of your sound, of your audio signal, and send that copy somewhere else to do something with it. So what would you do with it is, of course, the question. So sends are most often used for effects like reverb and delay, which is great because we've already learned about those. So we're going to explore that right now. I've got my chorus drums right here soloed right now because we're going to use them for this example. And normally, say if we wanted to put a reverb on these drums, what we would do is go to our inserts and add a reverb here, right? So we could come down and go to room reverb, and then we would use this dry wet knob, the mix knob, to determine how much reverb we want, with 0 being full dry signal, meaning no reverb at all, and 100 being full wet signal, meaning you're not hearing the original drum signal at all, you're only hearing the reverb. So here's an example of that. Here's the full dry, and then I'll slowly turn this up. Until we're like this, where now we're not hearing the original anymore, we're only hearing the reverb. I'll make the reverb bigger. Back to dry. And wet. Okay, so that's normally how we would do it. And if we wanted reverb on a bunch of different tracks, we would go put a room reverb on all those tracks separately and different reverbs and so on. That's the way we learned how to do it before. Now we're going to learn a new way using sends that's much more efficient, very cool, and has a lot of other purposes. So let's check that out. I'm going to remove this room reverb, and I'm going to create a new bus over here. So I'll go right click. Actually, I'm not going to create a bus. I'm going to create a effects channel, which is really which is a bus. I'm going to talk about the differences between them shortly, but I'll create an effects channel, and here it is, effects 1. I'm going to call this verb. And on this verb channel, I'm going to put the room reverb, just like we just had, which is down there. And I'll turn this up again a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is go to my chorus drums, and I'm going to go to my sends here, and I'm going to add a new send, and I'm going to say verb. So now what's happening is that the audio signal is coming into the top of the channel strip. There's no insert, so it continues on. And when it hits this, a copy is made of the signal, and the copy is being sent to this effects channel, which is a bus, and then the original one is still going through like normal, so you're still going to have it here. So when I play this now, we have two versions of the drums. We have this one here, which is the original signal, and we have this one here, which is the effects channel that we created with the room reverb on it. So now we're hearing the totally dry signal, and then we're hearing the other one which has the reverb on it and whichever degree of mix we have. Right now the mix is at 100%, which is really what it should be. Now, I'm going to talk about that. Why should this be at 100%? Let's think about it logically for a second. The goal here is to put reverb on the drums, of course. We have this chorus drums track, and that's our dry signal. Dry meaning it's the original audio signal with nothing added to it. And that's great. We want to hear that. We want to hear the real regular drums, right? But we also want to hear the reverb. So what we do is we send a copy of the dry signal of the original drums to this effects channel. When it hits it, it runs into the room reverb. And what we want is this mix knob, the dry wet knob, to be at 100% so that we don't hear any of the dry signal in this channel. We only want the reverb, pure reverb, because we have the chorus drums channel that has the dry signal in it. We don't need the dry signal again. We only need the reverb. So anytime you're using a send with an effect on it, that effect should be set to 100% wet because you already have the dry signal. You don't need dry again. So we don't want any dry in here. This should be 100% wet basically every time you ever do this. So if that's not clear, just pause, rewind, and watch this over again. Think about it for a minute. What's actually happening? We're trying to get reverb to come into our sound for our drums in this case. For that to happen, we want some dry, and then we want the reverb. We have a channel with the dry already. So when we send the copy over to the effects channel, we want it to be completely wet so we don't duplicate the dry sound. We already have the dry sound. So this is going to be pure wet. So how this works now is that this channel is pure reverb and this channel is pure dry. So if I play it like this, I can move this fader on the verb channel. I'll move it all the way down and we listen. And we have pure dry drums, right? Because there's no reverb on this channel. We're just hearing the dry. The audio signal comes down, it gets sent out right here to this channel, but this channel's muted right now, right? It's turned to 0, so we don't hear it. And then the original one keeps going and we hear it as normal. Now if I start to bring this fader up, you start to hear the reverb. So this is awesome. This channel is like a control for exactly how much of the reverb we want to use. And there's a way to control how much reverb we want to use. I'm going to talk about in just one sec. But what's important to know is that I'm trying to get this point across, of course, this channel is totally dry still. This channel, this one here, is pure reverb. So now we have this reverb on a bus instead of on the main channel. And there's a lot of benefits to that. We can do a lot of cool things with this. The main benefit of doing it this way is that we can send multiple channels, multiple audio signals to the same reverb. So we only need to make one reverb, or however many we want, in this case just one, and we can put multiple audio signals, multiple sounds with that reverb instead of having to put a separate reverb on every channel. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take another thing that's playing at the same time. How about, what do we got? How about this piano? So I'm going to solo this piano as well. And I'm going to unsolo the drums for now. I'm going to come to my piano track. I'm going to say send to verb. And now if we listen, I'll turn the verb even louder. You hear that? Gone. This is dry. With a reverb. And now if I bring the drums back in, the drums and the piano have the same reverb on them. Both channels are sending a copy of themselves to the reverb effects bus, and then since the reverb here is full wet, we only hear the reverb, we don't hear the dry signal, and now we have a way to have two different, or as many as we want, different channels being affected by the same reverb instead of having to copy this reverb onto both channels. The benefit is every time you copy the reverb over, it's harder for your computer to process that. It has to do some calculations to make the reverb work. So if you add 50 reverbs, your computer's going to get really bogged down and not work very well. This is so much better because we just have a single reverb and we can just send copies of our audio signals to that one reverb, and then they all get the same treatment. The other benefit is that it starts to make it sound like all these instruments might be in the same real space instead of having totally different reverbs for every instrument. When you have different instruments going to the same reverb, it makes them sound more cohesive, like they were really played in the same room or whatever hall you happen to be in, whatever reverb you created for it. So this is a huge benefit of using sends like this. We're going to talk more in depth about this in the next video.